Hi, I'm George Bailey. My wife Christina and I have 4 children. We started this podcast, Choose the Nickel, in an effort to learn how to raise our children to be financially and professionally successful adults. We seek out fascinating people and ask them about their own childhoods so that we can learn from them. Our next guest is John Moriarty, founder and president of E3 Consultants Group, where he has focused on comprehensive wealth management strategies since 1995. John has authored books and articles about finance and hosts a weekly radio show called Maximize Your Money. We hope you enjoy our conversation. John Moriarty, welcome to Choose the Nickel.
Thanks for having me, George.
So, John, tell us a little bit about E3. It seems that you've set up a very interesting model in which you're trying to create a family office for anybody, not just exclusively the very wealthy. Tell us a little bit about that.
I got into the wealth management industry in 1995. I was 21. I had played collegiate athletics, figured out that I wasn't going to be able to do that for a career, and decided to do an internship in the financial services industry. Got into the business when I graduated in May of 96. I was in my early 20s. I didn't really see an opportunity for me to kind of start my own practice at that point. So I started working with other financial professionals who had been in the business 10, 15, 20 years, kind of played an apprentice role for several different advisors. And while I was doing that, I started to see different areas of their practice from a systems and procedure standpoint where some different value could be created. And I also started to realize in dealing with different types of clients, regardless of their wealth, they all needed different types of services to be coordinated. So for about the first 8 years of my career, I was kind of focusing on, do I, build a practice? Do I build a firm? Like, what do I do? And in 2003, decided to open E3 Consultants Group.
Yeah.
And at that point, that's really where the focus for the family office model came in. And so since that time, we've created E3 Wealth, which is kind of our financial arm, doing what a normal financial services firm would provide to clients. And then we also focus in some different areas from a strategic perspective that are dealing with alternative asset classes and tax strategies and those types of things. Then in 2012, we started up our own tax firm, E3 Tax, because we felt like we needed that resource in-house. And then just recently, starting in 2019, we opened E3 Insurance, which is going to be our property and casualty arm for personal and commercial lines. And, really our focus there is to have that family office model where you've got a resource for anything that deals with money or finance, but it's not based on your net worth. It's not based on you having to have $1 million or $5 million, $10 million. It's really more about your mindset. And if you are someone that wants to think differently about money, you want to be educated, you want to have someone show you how to protect your personal or business economy, focus on your entire financial picture, then we believe our business model at E3 could be of service, whether it's an individual, a family, a business owner, or somebody that's entrepreneurial minded.
Well, what I really like about this new model, and I'm seeing it sprout up here and there, I think that it's really healthy for the middle class in particular, is that, when you talk with your insurance agent, for example, you may not appreciate how intertwined your decisions there are mixed in with what your accountant may say or what your FA may say. And so I think
Absolutely.
that, this is a movement towards a more holistic way of seeing things. And this has always been fairly accessible, I think, to the very wealthy, making it more accessible to the rest of us. Yeah, awesome move. Love what you guys are doing.
Appreciate that. And I would say that, yes, we are not doing anything that is new or groundbreaking. I think the way in which we're going about it in our business model and our underlying processes, our philosophy, our purpose, we want to challenge the status quo as to how Americans are educated about money and finance-related decisions. So your show, Choose the Nickel, you're focusing on things from an educational stance, and that's essentially how we're trying to build the foundations of our company. It's not about the products or services. It's about the information, the education, and then the environment that we're trying to create with clients. And you're right, that speaks to the middle class, but it also speaks to those people that are entrepreneurial minded who maybe are middle class, lower middle class. Their background isn't really the focus for us. It's really more of their mindset and where they're attempting to go. And we just find more people today wanting to be entrepreneurial, but not really knowing how to move into that role in their life and what that means for their family and their career and their financial situation.
Speaking of that mindset, I have listened to your podcast a number of times, and that's something that you really try to plug into. Could you tell us a little bit about where that mindset originated in your own life?
I think I've always been entrepreneurial, at least in the way that I kind of saw things. I grew up, I would say, lower middle class in St. Louis, actually, South County, Aston. My dad was a city policeman. My mom was a secretary at a law firm. We didn't come from money, but I always either was around kids that had parents that owned businesses or their parents seemed to be successful. And it wasn't that I kind of gravitated to it. I could see the differences. And it wasn't, in my mind, a jealousy thing. It was more of a curiosity. Well, why is it that Joe's family gets to go on vacation and can afford to go on vacation, and his dad seems to travel a lot? Like, what's going on there? I was very curious, and I started to really ask questions about why people worked at different places. Do they like what they did? And that curiosity led more to learning about corporate America, learning about running a small business. And I had several different, I'd call them mentors in my life, who gave me different perspectives on those things. And then as I was learning from different people, I just was able to carve out a path for myself and not say, oh, well, I want to be like this person. It was really more of, wow, if I could have that person's mindset, that person's drive, that person's financial acumen, those are the pieces that you could put together. Lee Majors and the $6 Million Man. Could you just pull all those pieces together and then make something out of it? And that's just kind of how my brains always work. I'm always looking at improving something, but not trying to tear something down in order to improve it. Can I make incremental improvements along the way and still be making progress?
So then, what is your first recollection of having a mentor, of somebody stepping into your life and making a difference in the way that John Moriarty saw things?
I actually write about this in the first book that I wrote, Understanding the Secret Language of Money. I wrote about two different mentors, two different perspectives on money. So the first one would have been my grandfather's on my mother's side, Art Schmickens. He basically grew up in the Depression, went to school on the GI Bill, got out of school, started with Favic Tractor in town, basically worked his way all the way up to becoming the treasurer with Favic. Worked there 30 plus years, retired. His retirement was what most people would think of as a retirement 30 years ago. It was, I have a pension, I have Social Security, I have my savings, the three-legged stool. And
you say pension, and I'm like, what?
Right, exactly. Well, back then, right?
Yeah, I know.
For people that were retiring then, and he worked at the same place. What I learned from him was the mindset. I never saw him get upset. I could tell when he was angry, but he never got upset about things. He was always somebody that would talk through something. And if you asked him a question or asked him 10 questions or 100 questions, he was always somebody that would sit down, answer your questions. So he was somebody I could really confide in and just ask a ton of questions. And the older I got and got into the financial services business, he was one of my first clients. And nice. I learned a perspective of a saver's mentality. And I learned what that meant. And I also learned how a saver's mentality was very different than where the economy was in the mid to late 90s and then going into the early 2000s. It was so funny. He wanted money sitting in treasuries and he wanted money in fixed income assets. And as assets were in that day, interest rates were going down, he would see the value of his portfolio going up, but the income off of his portfolio was going down. So if he had money in the bank, he was getting lower rates on his CD. He was getting lower yields on his fixed income. And he would be like, hey, what's going on here? Why am I getting less income? And I'm like, this is why, but Grandpa, don't worry about it because your value's actually going up. And he's like, but I'm not living on that. I'm living on the income. And I was like, okay, but we could sell some of those bonds and then you could live on that because the value continues to go up. And he's like, but if I sell it, I even have less income. And so I got into this understanding of defining growth or the growth profile of asset classes and looking at the difference between growth from income and growth from appreciation at a really early age in my career. And it's always stuck with me. And I've actually written about that concept because a lot of people today, when they're investing, they invest for appreciation, but they don't realize the risk that goes along with that versus investing for income or generating a return through yield or dividends or interest. And then what's the best way to have a combination of that? So in talking with my grandfather, he kind of instilled that mindset of here's how someone conservative who doesn't want to take a lot of risk thinks about money. At an early age, I started to realize, well, there's a lot of people that think this way, and the market and the economy is going in a completely different direction. There was a disconnect there. It didn't hit me until we got into the Great Recession of 07, 08, 09, where I could see more and more people's natural tendencies coming to play.
Oh, yeah.
They're raw. This is who I am as an investor. This is who I am from a financial mindset perspective. So once we kind of went through that, we really revamped the way that we communicated with clients and we looked at strategies for them and how we recommended different concepts because we said, you might be happy with what so-and-so is telling you when things are going good, but we know you're not going to be happy when things aren't going so good. And we also know based on the way this economy works, there's going to be good times and bad times. So we got to protect you against yourself, but we also got to protect you against the market and the next downturn, which is sort of what we're facing now with where the market's been for the last several months. But with a lot of our clients, it's really more of a reminder of, hey, this is why we did what we did. We don't need to panic. We just need to let the strategies work for you. Having that conversation with my grandpa at an early age, it kind of stuck with me in a very positive sense. It isn't the same way I think about things, but it's more of a foundational thought process because I've had other people that have been mentors more from an entrepreneurial perspective. And I know that my grandfather was not entrepreneurial, but he was that person that kind of said, look, you got to get all of these things done before you can go do something like that. He was actually the first person that I borrowed money from to start growing my business. That was an interesting event as well.
So how was it not the most intimidating thing to go to grandpa to start off your business? He has to have been looking at you and thinking like, yeah, I knew this kid when he was born. I knew him when he learned to walk. And now I'm going to hand him my money.
It's funny because before he became a client, he became the lender of first resort for me because I couldn't go to a bank. This was kind of my entry into the entrepreneurial mindset. I basically went to my grandfather to borrow, I think it might have been $10,000 or $12,000 because I wanted to join a country club. I was 25. I was working in the St. Albans area of West County, St. Louis, and had the opportunity to join as a junior member. And I just felt like for my business at that point, it would be a very good thing. I couldn't sit down with him or anybody else and say, well, here's how I think it relates to how it's going to grow my business or anything else. I just said, I know that if I do this and I make this commitment, I just needed the money for the initiation fee. I could cover the monthly cost and everything else. So I basically went and I had to sit down and kind of give him my business plan and why I think this would make good sense.
Yes.
And he listened to me and he said, look, I don't think it's a good idea for you to do this now because you're young. And he lived across the street from Sunset Country Club and he loved the golf, but that just wasn't for him. He had 6 kids. He worked to support his family. Like, if you're going to do this, this is the good time now to do it. You don't have a family. So I get it. I'm not saying that I think this makes sense, but if you believe in it, I'm going to believe in you. And then here's kind of my terms. I was like, okay. And I told him, I said, my goal is to get you paid back within 2 to 3 years. That's how I'm going to lay this out.
Yeah.
So we set up a payment plan. I started making payments to him. And then as I had some different revenue come in and had a couple months where got a pretty big commission check, I had 1 month where I decided, well, I'm going to send him a chunk of money to pay down the next several months because I don't know where revenue is going to be coming from, but I want to show him that this is making sense. So I did that. I sent him, I don't know, 5 or 6 months worth of payments. And I said, here, I want to pay ahead and stuff. About a month later, about the same time I would have normally sent the money, I get a call from him and he's like, hey, just wanted to check in with you, see how things are going, a little chit chat, small talk. And he's like, hey, I haven't gotten your check for this month. And I was like, well, Grandpa, I sent you money 6 months worth last month because I kind of had revenue come in. He's like, oh, yeah, I got that. And he goes, I applied that to your principal and everything else. You're still going to pay me every month. And he had like a ledger that he kept at home. And this was money that anybody in the family had ever borrowed from him, which when I saw that, I was like, oh, I'm in the book. So I'm like, so in my head, it was like, okay, now my goal is how fast can I get out of the book or how can I close that page? So I actually decided at that point, okay, I'm going to drive over to Grandpa's, give him my check for that next month. And then I made sure that I think within the next 6 months, I got him paid off. It was a great experience, but I'm not borrowing money from Grandpa anymore.
So I got to ask about this book. This fascinates me.
Yeah.
Grandpa had the book. When is the first time that you became aware that Grandpa had a book?
When I missed that monthly payment that he was expecting.
That was it.
And I came over to the house. I gave him the check and he pulled out the ledger.
Yeah, the ledger.
And then he flipped the page to where it was. He marked it off and he's like, okay, we're good. And I'm like, how many people are in that book? He's like, oh, well, this is just over several years and different people come to me. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I didn't know what I was getting into, but now that I knew it, my goal was how quick can I get that ledger paid down? And it was a very good experience for me because how you deal with banks and how you deal with access to credit, it is a different mindset as well. I mean, some people are very risk averse. Some people don't like that. Other people understand the utilization of leverage and how it can help you grow.
Yeah.
But it's that mindset of what's the purpose of these dollars. I learned that at a very young age that if you owe money to someone, that can sometimes change the relationship. So whoever you're borrowing money from or whatever you're looking to do, you've got to understand how that person's going to be viewing the transaction. Just like you may say, oh, well, it's no big deal. It's Grandpa. I'm actually paid ahead.
Yeah.
But in his mind, he's like, nope, this is a transaction. We got to see this through. You didn't pay me this month, so I don't care that you're paid ahead. You got to keep paying. Once I knew that, I understood where everything stood.
So this is what's so fascinating to me is the family dynamic of money. And so I wonder, in reflecting on that, John, do you think that it is healthy to have that type of a leisure? And do you think that that is something that we can make kids aware of early on? Just say, look, I'm very willing to loan out money, but it comes with interest and all that. What's a lesson that a family can learn from that experience?
I think the lesson is, when you do something like that and you hold somebody accountable, which that's what my grandfather was doing. I don't know what would have happened if I couldn't have paid him back or didn't pay him back. I'm sure that nothing would have changed with our relationship. And maybe I would have felt guilt because I didn't pay him back. Maybe the relationship would change. But for me, it was like, no. I borrowed this money with the intention of paying back. There was no
personal
other way
accountability.
This was going to happen.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think that's also something too with your children or grandchildren or anything else. If he's looking at me as I'm his grandson, so I'm going to do whatever I can for him, that's one thing. But if he was really looking at this as, okay, if you're borrowing money from me, that's no different than when he was at Favic Tractor and somebody was borrowing money to purchase equipment and they were financing it for him. And he's like, look, this is how I handled my vendors. I want to treat you just like I would treat any other corporate transaction because you're going to learn that this is the way most people and most organizations handle this type of transaction. And so I've kind of taken that experience and attempted to do that with our family and other things as well. But I've also had other experiences. I had a gentleman that I worked for. So I played high school and college baseball, and summers of my high school years, junior, senior years, I played on the select baseball team. And this was a traveling team before there were traveling teams and traveling sports and all that stuff today. So this was all financed by one individual who happened to be our coach, and his family traveled with us, and his wife did the scorebook, and his kids helped with all the equipment, and the son was our catcher, and the younger son played on the team. And so this gentleman basically ran his own business, financed the entire team through his business. So nobody paid for anything. Nobody paid for equipment. Nobody paid for games. Nobody paid for trips. He paid for hotel rooms. He paid for food. This man taught me pretty much the building blocks to my entrepreneurial mindset with things. And when I was in my freshman year in college, almost 8 of the players that played on that summer team went to college together down at SLU. And I went to him my freshman year to borrow some money because we didn't have enough money to cover part of my tuition or room and board, books, something like that. And might have been $1,000, $2,000. It wasn't a lot. It was a lot of money for me, but it wasn't a lot of money for him. And he pulled out a promissory note, had me sign it, and put it in a drawer, and just said, "Hey, when you get out of school, when you get a chance, you pay me back."
Wow.
It was funny because from that day forward, there was never one mention of it. Years later, he had passed away, and I had actually talked with the son, and I'm like, "Hey, I don't know if you know that your parents did this. And I know they did it with other people as well."
Yeah.
I told him this meant so much to me at that time. And I said, "I'm going to write about your dad in the forward of my book. Are you okay with that?" And he was like, "Absolutely. I really appreciate it. That will be a good way to keep his memory alive." And so it was weird because it was between my grandpa and Mr. Nance, it was 2 different mindsets and perspective on money. But I learned so much from each of them. I took the pieces of each of them that I thought, okay, this would be good for me to do. I'm not going to do everything that they did. I'm not going to do it their way. I'm going to do it my way, but I'm going to learn from those experiences. I kind of take those types of life lessons along with me when I see different people or deal with different people. I'm always looking, what type of person are they like? And is this person similar to this entrepreneur that I've run into, or is this person similar to that business person that I know that maybe isn't as good with money? And that's the way I kind of see the world a lot of times, is from those life lessons. Everybody's so unique when it comes to how they view money, the way that they spend it, the way that they save it. It's impossible to say that you're going to be in one of these 3 categories or columns. There's so many shades of gray with people that you just really have to understand, okay, how did they think about money? But you can learn from all the other experiences. So the asking of the questions and saying, do you think about it this way? What were your life experiences? Who was your mentor? When you learn from those types of conversations, then you can move in one direction or the other. And that's essentially what we try to do with people, is customize things to fit them, but know that there's going to be similarities as to other people that we've come across.
But the similarity between these 2 gentlemen in your life, and I think that that's a very powerful story, John, because it shows that these 2 people both really believed in you. That is so important to have. I think that our kids need somebody who really believes in them. But there is one thing that really makes me wonder, and that is you showed, at least on some level, a propensity for self-responsibility. What was the first time in your life, particularly as a child, that you remember needing to demonstrate, I'm going to be responsible, I'm going to make the right choice here? Or maybe when was there a time when you made a wrong choice and you learned, oh, I'd better be more responsible in the future?
George, that's a really good question. I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. Maybe it's just the oldest child syndrome, but
it is.
I always had that thought process when I was doing something, that whatever the results were or whatever the actions were going to be, taking responsibility for my ability to do my part, playing team sports and being someone that did focus on school. For me, school was more about getting results, not the learning process. It's funny, but I kind of look back on it now and I say to myself, would things have turned out differently if I would approach school more from the learning aspect versus just getting good grades.
Yeah.
But I did that with sports and other areas. That's where my outlet was for my capabilities, but then also learning my limitations. I was by no means the strongest or the fastest or could hit the ball the farthest or anything else. My ability to play collegiate athletics was just my sheer will and determination because I wanted it really bad. And my physicality and my abilities kind of peaked out in college, and it wasn't going to happen for professional sports. It wasn't for a lack of will. I wanted to play professional baseball, but it wasn't going to happen. I think for me over time, being able to play at high levels and enjoy sports and being on teams, that's something actually I've carried into the business world. And I've learned over time that in order to grow something and have it become significant, the team aspect of growing something has to be there, because one individual has a limitation on the amount of time that they can put towards something, the amount of talent that they can bring to the table to grow something, and then the amount of capital that you can put to work. If you're only one person, you're going to have the limitations. And the biggest limitation is time. So you have to be able to leverage your time by bringing in other resources and bringing in other people.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we built our business. That's how my mindset is when we're working with clients. That's my mindset when I'm talking to people. It's if you think that your way is the only way that things can work, or the only way that's the right way, especially when it comes to dealing with kids or dealing with the younger generation, like with millennials today and everything else, I'm always of the mindset that I think I know how I see things, but that's just my perspective.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to learn from other people's perspective. And that's where I believe in today's environment, there's so much access to information for people today because of the way the internet works and social media and everything else. But people now need filters. They need those mentors. They need people to kind of tell them, look, I know you think that this is the way things work, but let me tell you that there are other perspectives. There are other ways people look at things. And I'm not telling you that because I want you to look at it my way. I'm telling you that because you may start to realize, oh, there's other people that look at things differently. I could probably learn from them. Instead of me thinking one way, let me have the way I think about things be more open-minded, be more abundant, be more focused on not a result, but is this a learning experience? Is this something that I can grow from? And if I look at it that way, it's not a failure, it's only feedback. That kind of mindset, that's where the NeuroLinguistic Programming, the behavioral finance side of my learning kind of comes from. It's just realizing that.
Before we get into that, because that is a subject I want to touch on, first of all, that's a terrific plug for sports, but it's also a terrific plug for being the oldest. I got to tell you, I'm a little bit jealous. I am the youngest, and I don't feel like I learned any of those lessons on the exact same level as what you're describing. And I think there is something about that dynamic of where you're born, what order you're born in the family, and how that affects your outlook on life. And it's very hard to work with your kids when, you know, I've got 4 kids and I know that you've got a few. They each just see things so differently. And maybe that's where sports comes in so handy, is that you put a group of kids together who have way different dynamics. You get them to work together to take responsibility for their individual actions in terms of how that contributes to the collective success. That might be a great little way. But now let's go into neuro-linguistic programming. This is something that you've described in your book, Understanding the Secret Language of Money. Tell me a little bit about this.
I would refer to it as a science or a technology. So neuro-linguistic programming was taught to me by a business coach I started working with in 2005. And basically, it is the understanding of the way people think, communicate, and behave. It's their relationship with several different factors in their life. The way I say it to people is it helps me understand the way people think, communicate, and behave. And then I take that and talk about it in their relationship with money. So we kind of use NLP and NLP techniques in relationship to money and finance, because people have a specific way that they look at money and finance related decisions. When I started to learn about NLP, I became fascinated because for many, many years, there was this mindset that I had when things would go right, or I had an intuition, or things just ended up turning out for me, that it was either luck or it was my ability to be in the right place at the right time. And over time, I started learning about NLP and the law of attraction and abundance mindset. Mm-hmm. And I started to realize that there's an energy that gets created by people and their thoughts. It can be positive, it can be negative. These types of mindsets, if you are stuck in a mindset, it can control the way that you move through life and what you do. And so my learning about, there's a certain way people think about different decisions. There's a certain way people act or communicate. There's a certain way people behave. And those behaviors and everything can change. But for a lot of people, they grow into who they are. So it's not one day you wake up and you say, well, I'm going to have this kind of mindset, or I'm going to have this kind of fear, or I'm going to have this way of going into my place of employment and working. That happens over time. So there's all these experiences that we have, and then we build our environment around it. So for me, this learning about neuro-linguistic programming, it really helped me start to understand people and then communicate with them based on what I understood from them, what kind of feedback and information they were giving me. And then what we've tried to do in our business as it relates to money is help people almost educate themselves about who they are, confirm, is this who you are? Is this the way you think about money? And get them to say, yes, this is who I am. And then say, okay, well, based on that, we think we should go this direction. But also knowing that, hey, if you think you want to change, if you do want to be different, here's how we can get down that path. And so we've worked on this for almost 15 years now, understanding behavioral finance. And I actually looked and saw on your website that you had Daniel Crosby on your show. And I've read his first book on the personal benchmark, and then based on seeing him on your podcast, I actually ordered his most recent 2 books, because the behavioral finance side of things, that's becoming in vogue in the financial industry probably over the last 10, 15 years. You've got different people like Daniel Kahneman and other people that have won Nobel Prizes on the concept of behavioral finance. But for me, it's not just understanding that, hey, people make decisions about money a certain way. It's understanding that, and then how do you communicate with them based on where they are, versus let me try and get you to change the way you think. What we're trying to do is say, we understand the way you think.
Yes.
Now we're going to meet you where you're at, and we're going to help you based on who you are today. And if you want to change that, let's work on that together.
It's tempting to look at something like that and think, isn't that manipulative? But I think it might actually be the opposite, because what you're doing is that you are forcing them to become aware of what they're doing, rather than kind of obfuscating that, or confusing it, and forcing them to come face to face with those decisions so that they can now, in light of their awareness, make better decisions. That appeals to me. I think that that type of self-awareness, when I read that in your book, I thought like, okay, this is something that we could all be better for understanding. But then when we bring it back to kids though, at what level can we make them aware of the impact that their thoughts have on them?
With kids today, because of the access to content on the internet and social media and all these other things, you're kind of being bombarded with information, and then having to grow up maybe a lot quicker than what most people would say is healthy. The way I look at it from a NLP perspective or from a behavioral, it's more of, if I can communicate more with them, understand their feelings, and then understand how they make decisions. If they make a bad decision, or they make a decision that has a consequence, whether you call it good or bad, it might be more of how you frame it. But if they make a decision that has a consequence, why? Why did you make that decision? Let's talk through that. I say to people all the time, I don't believe that you can ever over communicate. You might not need all the information, but I would rather us communicate to a point where you're like, okay, there's nothing else we can talk about here, about this particular situation, versus only give me what you feel like I want to hear, or only give me what you think is right or is the thing to say at this point. No, let's communicate to a point where you say, all right, I think I can learn from this. And then the other side of it is making sure that kids know you're going to make decisions sometimes that have rewards, sometimes have consequences, but it's much better for you to work through those things with your parents, with people that you trust, with your mentors, versus being out there on an island. And I think that's where a lot of kids today with social media and just other things, they get into this overwhelmed sensation where there's just so much activity and so much data and different things that they're doing where they don't really know where to turn, and they don't want to kind of reach out or say something to somebody, because if it's too much, then it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't be on social media anymore. Maybe I should cut off from this or that. And realistically, sometimes they just need a break. They just need to, maybe have some human interaction and talk with somebody, because when you do that, you do feel better. There's a difference between having a communication where you're vocalizing something with someone and a conversation where I'm texting you. And same thing with an email. There's different emotions that you have. I mean, there's a lot of emails that I never send to people that I get a lot of my frustration out just in typing, but it would probably be something I wouldn't say to somebody. Yeah. And that's, I think, the part of life in today's environment where we just have to be aware of it and then say, I'd rather us talk through it than just go about life never bringing it up and sweep it under the rug, because I don't see how that's going to be healthy for anybody.
Well, I think that there are a lot of great ideas there. I love the idea of getting our kids to communicate and creating a space where they feel safe doing so. And particularly when you're online all the time, everything becomes an avatar that you can treat or mistreat at will. But people are not that way. And I like that idea. Open the communication channels. I have one more question for you, and that is, what is your favorite charitable cause?
So our favorite charitable cause is the Mighty Oaks Heart Foundation. They work with families who have children with congenital heart defects. It is a charity that my wife and I have been involved with since their beginning in 2011. It was started by a couple, Becky and Greg Ortel. Greg and I go back 30 plus years. We went to high school and college together, played baseball together. They lost their son, Oaks Ortel, to a congenital heart defect back in 2011, 2012. So for us, it was something where we got involved with them to really help them. And then the charity has kind of become its own thing. So they've been doing this for 7 years. My wife is on the board. I am on the board. It's something where them being able to help families at times that are pretty chaotic. Their goal is to help the family, not so much the child. Child's being helped by their physicians and the people at Children's Hospital and other places that they're at. This is a charity that's really about helping the family and kind of create a little bit of normalcy through the chaotic time. A lot of these families have to travel to get to different places. They might have to stop working for months. So they do a lot of things financially for the family so they can be with their kids. And that to us is something that if you can give people the time to be able to spend with their family, it's very rewarding.
Yeah, that's a very precious thing to be able to do. And I really appreciate your thoughts on that. John, I also really appreciate your being on the show. It's been really fun to talk to you.
I appreciate you having me, George.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to check the show notes at www.choosethenickel.com for links to names, books, and other resources we discussed in today's show. While you're there, subscribe to your newsletter. Also, please like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share with your friends. We appreciate your support.